Y'all have to bear with me a little bit because I didn't know I was speaking today, so I'm not as prepared as I normally am. There will be hats to be changing on and off and everything. So I guess maybe I'll start going through my talk, and I'm going to incorporate some things to respond to what Simon said, because actually I think it's a good talk to follow his. I love seeing the open source initiative slide with software freedoms and talking about how all of the things that we really like about open source software and business come from software freedom, and that we have to tend to software freedom if we're going to expect to continue to have those freedoms. And so I actually think that the ideas dovetail well on one another. He made a lot of points that I want to make. So therefore, that means there's a lot of good stuff to talk about. So the first thing you need to know about me is that I'm your new cyborg overlord. So the story about how I've gotten involved in some of these issues is quite a personal one. I have a heart condition, which it still feels really weird to say that in front of like a whole group of people. I sort of feel like I'm at some support group and sort of being like, hey everybody, I have a heart condition. But I do. I have a big heart. I have a huge heart. So my heart is actually 3 times the size of a normal person's heart. It's called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And it means that my heart is very big, but it's also very stiff, and it's pretty peculiar. It's like it's not just that my heart is scaled up; it's that it's much thicker. So the problem with it is that if I in certain circumstances it might try beating really hard and then become ineffective, and the technical term for that is sudden death. So I am at a very high risk of. Oh, I can select for this. I have a very high risk of suddenly dying, and that's the biggest part about my heart condition. Other than that, I don't have any symptoms. I'm not allowed to do things that I never wanted to do, like run a marathon or go racing or anything. It's a great excuse, but I am. There is a chance that I could run across the street to try to catch the bus. And not make it across the street. So not because there is a bus, but anyway. So it's kind of an interesting place to be, and there's a solution for it, which is to get a pacemaker defibrillator and become a cyborg. So which was very interesting. When I was told that I needed a heart device, I think there were all sorts of like normal kinds of reactions to that. Just first, there was kind of dealing with my own mortality, the weirdness of it, the fact that and now, as I said, I am a cyborg. I got the heart device, so knowing that I have a bit of metal in my body that you can feel, the wire actually goes through my veins into my heart where it's screwed in, and it's like I don't know. Conceptually, it was a lot to deal with, and there were kind of identity issues in that. But the longer I went on without getting it, the more I realized that I had to get it, and that I could be a cyborg for good. I realized that I needed this device because every day that went by that I didn't have it was a day that I could just suddenly drop dead, and that wasn't so cool. But there was another problem that I don't think anybody who I know of who got a heart device before had thought about, which is that when the cardiologist slid the device, like not the device I actually got, but an example device that was basically the electrophysiologist that I went to kept one of these devices in his drawer, so that when he had patients like me who were like, "What do you mean I need a heart device? This is so terrifying," he could take out this little thing and say, "Look, it's really not scary at all. It's just this little thing. Doesn't it seem friendly? You can have it in your body and it will save your life." And he slid it over the desk to me, and I said, "Well, what does it run?" And he had no answer for me. And nobody had ever asked him that question before. And he said, "Well, what do you mean, what does it run?" And I said, "Well, it has software on it. That's how it operates." I actually already was a lawyer at the Software Freedom Law Center, so I was thinking about these issues. But I also had been an engineer and a programmer. So I said, surely you can tell me what kind of software is on it and how it runs, and can I look at it? And he said, okay, well, we're going to pull out, there's actually a representative from the medical device manufacturer here. We're going to pull him into the office and see if he can answer your questions. And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, there's software on this device. Can I, and you're going to put the device in my body and connect it to my heart. Can I see the source code? Can I see how it runs? And the answer was, whoa, that's a big problem. Yeah, I'm going to go talk to the company about that. And then nothing. So I called all 3 of the major medical device manufacturers and asked them, can I see the source code for the device? If I can, I'll go with your device. Like, I might find some problem. I'm not sure. I haven't programmed in a while. If I don't know what I can find, but I'd ask my friend to look at it, and and no, nothing. I offered them to sign a non-disclosure agreement saying, look, I just feel so uncomfortable having this thing put in my body without being able to see it. Why don't I sign a non-disclosure agreement that I promise I won't share it with anybody else, which is, antithetical to me being at the Software Freedom Law Center, but I just felt so weird about having this thing that I was willing to do that, and they said no. So I kept putting it off, and my parents, every time I didn't call my mother back for an hour, she would call my friends and say, have you heard from Karen? Is she still alive? I went to brunch with a friend and she started crying. I was like, you know what? I can't delay getting this just because I'm worried about the software. It's a really important issue, but I can't risk my life on it. So when Simon said, I have to live, it was such a weird resonance with me because that's exactly the discussion, the analysis that went through my head, which is, I literally need to live, so I need to think about this, and I'll get back to that later. So I got the device, and I decided that I was going to do all this research then, and I happily worked at the Software Freedom Law Center, and was able to launch an initiative there on this very issue. So I did a whole bunch of research, and I found out some things that probably won't surprise you, like software has bugs. The Software Engineering Institute published a study that they estimated that for every 100 lines of code, a bug is introduced, which is not very many lines of code. So even if you get most of the bugs, there's still going to be some bugs. And then I looked at all of these studies about the software on medical devices in particular. And there was one study that systematically took all of the recalls and other kinds of publications by the Food and Drug Administration in the United States, which approves these devices, and they also put out warnings whenever something goes wrong. And these people studied all of the recalls, and so of all the recalls, of the ones that they could determine were because of software, which wasn't all of them, and of the ones that they could see what was the problem, 98% of them would have been detected if the company who had made the device had done all pairs testing. And for people here who may not be as technical, it's basically testing where you test for multiple conditions happening at once. So it's sort of looking at many different circumstances that can happen, and it's something that any computer scientist would probably think about doing. So I also looked into and reading about the software. The bugs in this software was really sickening because there are all these examples of medical devices failing. I mean, we're all aware of the etheric radiation stuff, but there's a lot of stuff since then. There are insulin pumps where it was very unclear what field people were entering, and so technicians thought they were entering hourly dosages for insulin delivery, but they were actually entering minutes, and a bunch of people died because of that. Yeah, I mean, just crazy stuff. I think actually he was laughing about something else, but it really astounded me. And every time I would find one of these major medical device failures, I had to, it really made me physically ill because I could feel, and over time my device has gotten more comfortable. I don't really feel it now, but for the first 6 months, I felt it all the time. And I kept thinking, what are the problems in my device? So I would put it away and not work on it for a while and then come back. So it took me over a year to work on this stuff. So I looked into what the Food and Drug Administration does, but what I really found out is what it doesn't. So the Food and Drug Administration typically does not review the source code on these devices. I couldn't believe it. They don't generally do so unless they already think there's some problem. And because of that, they actually don't even request the software in most instances. What they do is they ask the medical device manufacturers to come up with their own reports about what the software does and how it operates, and they certify it and test it. But there's no clear set of guidelines as to what those companies have to do. And the idea behind that is pretty clear. The FDA basically doesn't want to have to be in a situation where they're saying these are, your requirements are A, B, and C, and this new device has there should have been D, but because the FDA, it's a new device, the FDA didn't know it. And so they say the people who know the devices the best are these companies that are designing them, and so therefore they know what kinds of tests they should do. But basically what this means is that because the FDA is not looking at the source code and they're asking for it, and they don't have any clear guidelines, any clear requirements. They have some guidelines, but requirements as to what needs to be tested. There's a lot of power being left at these companies as to what kinds of tests are done and what kinds of tests aren't. And because the FDA is not asking for the source code, they're never getting the source code, which means that there's no there's no repository for the public. So in the instance that there's catastrophic failure at Medtronic, for example, there may not be a copy of the software on my hard device. And my hard device is only as good as it works right now. So you can talk to these hard devices remotely, and you can update them. But if I don't have the source code, I can't patch it. And if there's no one at Medtronic to help me, then I'm just out of luck. So, I talked to the head of cybersecurity at the FDA, and I was invited to talk at this healthcare panel, and it was such a weird, awesome experience because I put these slides up, similar slides up, and I was like, correct me, John Murray, if I'm wrong, but aren't these things true? And and he didn't say anything. And at the end of the panel, we each presented a little presentation, and we were on a panel. And when we started the panel, he said, "I just want to say that people get really confused about what the FDA does, but we are not here to review every part of every device. We just couldn't do it, and we don't have the resources. We can't review the software." And I was like, ooh, that means, this is perfect, time for me to chime in and say, well, actually, that's not what I'm asking for. What I'm asking for is for you to require that it be published so that everyone can review it. This way, the FDA outsources to the public. And he said, I hadn't actually thought that makes a lot of sense. What you're saying is that everybody else does that. Great. I'm paraphrasing. But yeah, so one of the things that also astounded me as a lawyer looking into this is that in the United States, because of the way that the FDA approval process works, it's a federal approval process, and therefore patients are actually preempted from suing under state tort law. So I can't just go into my state court and sue over my medical device because it's been approved on a federal level. So it's there's this whole list of remedies that I couldn't even go to court and take these medical device companies to task for because it was properly approved at the FDA. So it's kind of craziness for me. A part of the thing that I'm sorry that I'm a little disjointed, but I did want to say that these devices have actually been hacked. I don't know if you guys have read, but there's a think tank that took a bunch of these pacemaker devices and they reverse engineered them using just regular equipment that wasn't very sophisticated, and they were able to. What they found was that the broadcasting that these devices are doing doesn't have any encryption on it, so they actually were able to give unwanted charges, so shocks that were unnecessary. And I did have an unnecessary shock once. My device initially was set to sensitively, and I got a shock, and it completely, debilitates you. I was luckily sitting down, but it took me a good 20 minutes to feel like I could walk out and it's like someone kicking you in the chest. And they were able to stop the delivery of therapy. And I'm not using my pacemaker as an ongoing thing, but if a lot of people rely on the pacing functionality just to live normally, and perhaps even worse, they were able to put the device into test mode, which you wouldn't even know about, and what that does is it runs down the battery really fast. My device is only as good as my battery is. So as soon as my battery runs down, I have to get surgery to replace this device. I may as well just throw it out. So it's kind of crazy. So I don't have freedom in my own body, which, you know, take a step further from what Simon was saying, how software freedom is critical in business. Like, this is my body. You're gonna put something in my body, you're gonna put a device and connect it, literally screw it into my heart, and you won't let me see it? It's madness. So we've got the worst of both worlds. We have no encryption. These devices have been shown to be hacked. Actually, recently someone was able to do the same thing with the implanted insulin pumps. Those are like kind of the two biggest classes of implanted medical devices. There's the insulin pumps, the pacemaker defibrillators. Then there's also like a bunch of pain management stuff and some implanted like neurostimulation therapy. And then also somebody wrote me that they are considering getting implanted hearing aids. So hearing implants implanted into their skull, and they wanted to talk to me about, you know, the software freedom implications of this. And what's interesting to me is Harold Welty did a whole bunch of work with hearing aids where they were able to determine there could be privacy implications with the hearing aids, because as they talk to each other, there's an opportunity to intercept that and actually be able to spy on people and get their whole conversation. So, like, just really amazing stuff. So we've got no security on these devices, and the reason they have that is because they say that it is to basically to preserve battery power, but there have been a whole slew of proposals that would not run down the battery, and they still don't implement them. And on the other side, we've got closed code. So it's just like completely, totally messed up, right? Nobody can review the code so that, you know, to make sure that it's safe, and there's no requirement for privacy or to prevent people from tampering with them. So it's crazy. So all of this led me to the conclusion that, admittedly, I was biased before as an employee of the Software Freedom Law Center, but that these devices need to be free and open. It's so easy to see. You know, if it's free and open, anybody can look. Ooh, that was exciting. I was scolded. Anybody can. They aren't really. None of these things are made for women's clothing. I might add. But no, you know, anyone can come and look at the system and find out if it has problems. They can assess the risks. If there is a problem, anybody can propose a patch. So these things, and we see this in commercial software too. And you know, it's one of the reasons why Firefox, you know, is pointed to as being so much more successful than Internet Explorer, because there are all these patches coming in from all over the place. In the case of medical device software, you can see that being extremely important, but I guess in some ways counterintuitive, but it goes the opposite way, which is make our software open but encrypt it well, so that I can choose what patches go onto my software that's connected to my heart. And then most importantly about this is that I don't want to be just reliant on Medtronic. Like, we've seen so many companies come in and out. We've seen their failures. We've seen the way that basic things that we expect companies to do don't get done. Am I taking too much? Oh, I am. I'm really rambling on. Okay. So I don't want to depend on a single party, I said party because I'm a lawyer, but you know, I want to rely on a single company. And so it's easy to go from there to say, our software must be safe, you know, and it's not just medical devices, it's anything you rely on for our life and for our society. So our cars, we had that problem where the cars were, you know, I think there were different examples in different countries, but where the software on cars was malfunctioning, and people were crashing, which is problematic. The voting machines, we really need our voting machines, because that's how we choose to govern our society, our financial markets, and again, our medical devices. But what's amazing to me right now is that what is life and society critical is just completely blurring. Like the way that we do our computing has changed. So like 5 years ago, my mother did not use computers for almost anything. She was terrified of them. She didn't want to do anything with them. It was completely not in her world. But but in the last couple of years, she's really taken to her Mac, and she now uses the computer for everything. She books all of her travel online. And that's true across the board. Now everybody is using their software for everything. And that means, you know, all of our grandparents are using their software, our children, everybody is using software for everything. We're using it to see when our buses are coming. We're using it to keep track of, you know, what restaurants we should go to and where our friends have eaten. We're using it to say what we have eaten and what, you know, how to keep track of our diet and how to keep track of our exercise. But now there is already software for phones that can interact with those insulin pumps so that you can interact what you're keeping track of your diet and your exercise with your blood sugar level. So this idea of what is life and society critical has completely blurred. And when people use computers, they expect them to be easy to use. They expect to use them. I mean, this is what Simon was saying before. Even typing in a command to run a projector was too much, was too much effort. And if it was for Simon, who's technically minded, my mother would never be able to do that. But my mother expects to be able to use computers, and she expects to be able to use it for everything. So our UI expectations have completely changed, which brings me to the desktop. So about a month ago, I switched over from the Software Freedom Law Center to becoming executive director of the Gnome Foundation. And Gnome just released Gnome 3. It's so pretty. I don't know if you guys have used it yet, but you should give it a try. It's still early days. There's been a lot of criticism about it, but there's been a lot of really positive feedback too, especially from people like my mother, who are really reticent with computers. This is basically a complete redesign by Gnome for user experience. Basically, they solely went about trying to make a better experience for people, ordinary people, not necessarily hackers. Which I think is kind of, it's sleek and it's pretty and it's easy to use, and it dispenses with a lot of the things that we used to think people wanted to use about our computers, but we've seen from Mac usage and from other kinds of computers that it isn't really what ordinary people want. And so I would just say that I'm with Simon. We need trends towards freedom. I love this 1984 Apple ad because it's so iconic, and it's the crashing of the screen, right? Where we have no idea what our life and society critical functionality is going to be, but we don't know what we're going to rely on. I mean, who thought that we would be relying on our iPhone to interact with our phones to interact with our insulin pumps? We would never have thought that, and it's because it's coming out of the way we use everyday computing. So we need to build on free and open platforms as much as we can. It's so important. Simon joked and said, think of the children, but think of the children. Think about what kind of a world we're creating. And if we can all work together and focus on free and open platforms, we're going to be much safer ultimately. And I think I am totally out of time because Nan is looking at me. The Gnome Foundation and the Software Freedom Law Center, where I'm still doing pro bono work, are both 501c3s. Become a friend of Gnome. We really need your help. Creating great user interface is it takes a lot of effort and a lot of volunteer effort by a lot of people, and having financial support is really important. Try out Gnome, and it's CC by SA, so you should have freedom in content as well as in software. Thank you very much.